Many of you have already heard the testimony of the quantum entanglement that the Lord gave me to do on January 6th for my granddaughter, Deborah. On January 6th, I had not just the divine download for what he's going to do through the corporate order of Melchizedek, which I also presented as the promises of God earlier in this year. At that very same time, on January 6th, he gave me extremely specific instructions about how to help my granddaughter overcome a 5,000-year generationally descended disease that can only be obtained by people in the direct bloodline of the Ashkenazi Hebrew priests from the Second Temple era. At that time, my granddaughter was extremely incapacitated, and I'm just going to give a brief description because it has to do with the opening up of the door called 222. During the last several years, she has been completely incapacitated, and she has something called the Ehlers Danlos disease, which cannot be contracted by anyone who is not a bloodline descendant of the Ashkenazi priests. So during the evolution of this disease in her body, her entire skeleton was falling apart inside of herself. And what happens is that all of the connective tissues in her body begin to disintegrate. So all you would have to do is just touch her and all of her bones would come out of joint. If you just touched her on the shoulder, her shoulder would come out of joint. If she was driving in the car and somebody stopped quickly, her ribs would come out of joint. If she tried to stand up on her feet would come out of joint. So she was to the point where she was so beat. On top of that, she had a double combination because the Ehlers-Danlos disease was also affecting her pulmonary organs of her body. From 18 years on, she had to have a heart defibrillator. It was her lungs were shutting down. Her digestive system was completely shutting down. And in fact, on the second day of our quantum entanglement on her behalf, she was actually scheduled to go to the doctor to have them put a live feeding tube directly into her stomach because her stomach could no longer contract in order to digest her foods. She was relegated to her bed. She couldn't even get up. She couldn't hold a glass of water. She couldn't type. She couldn't write. She couldn't do anything. Couldn't comb her own hair. Couldn't take a shower unless my daughter was there to help her with all of that. And then it had to be done very gingerly because if she touched her in the wrong way, her joints would come out of place. On January 6th, the Lord gave me an extremely specific and detailed thing called a quantum entanglement, where he invited people from 6 other people to come and join me at 3 o'clock in the morning, which Mountain Time is the time that I enter into what's called the night watch. And many, many things happened during that period. But of course, because they were from other continents, they were at different timetables. When I set up the meeting between all of these people, I even inquired of the Lord because 3 of them don't even speak to one another. They don't agree on anything theologically. And in fact, 2 of them haven't spoken to one another for a period of 7 years. So I inquired of the Lord and I said, Lord, how are we going to bring this quantum entanglement to pass without unity in the spirit? And he just laughed at me. What a silly question. Sometimes I get the biggest kick out of him. He's like, you think that I'm so small that I can't operate above and beyond all of that. And he said, don't worry about it. Whether they know it or not, they are already one in the spirit. The only thing that keeps them separate is their carnal nature. So the issue of quantum entanglement is bringing people together at the very same time to pray. Each one of the people that he called me to pray has a particular area of dominion in the invisible realm. One of them has great testimonies in the courts of heaven. Another one has great testimonies coming out of the 4 winds. which is the cross point in a very high level of heaven. Another one is a very fluid seer who can see into multi-dimensions at the same time. So when we all came together on that night, sadly enough, one of the people who was not in perfect union could not get on the Zoom call. And I tried and tried and tried. I tried multiple computers trying to bring him on, and it just wasn't going to happen. So during the time, he said, forget about getting me on the Zoom call. I'm just going to go in and do my thing, and I'll tell you when something significant is happening. So during the course of this time that we were together, we ascended into the heavens. And say the fluid seer from South Africa, she would say, I see Deborah laying on a white slab. She's surrounded by orange, yellow fire. All of a sudden, there's an explosion and the fire turns to brilliant blue-white. About 3 seconds later, I get a text from the other side of the world, from the person who couldn't get on the Zoom, saying, I saw Deborah laying on a white slab. She was surrounded by yellow-orange fire. All of a sudden, there was an explosion and the fire turned blue-white. At another particular time, one of the people that was in a high level of the heavenly realms said, I see that it's now time, and I hear the command of the Lord to go into her bloodstream, shift and change the construct of her DNA, and remove the genomes that carry the disease from the Ashkenazis. About 3 seconds later, I get a text from the other side of the world saying, I hear the voice of the Lord saying, it's time for us to go in now and adjust her DNA and extract from her genomes the genomes that would carry the Ehlers Danlos disease. To make a long story short, in the course of that day, we actually did everything that the Lord said by exact instruction. During the next 7 days, my granddaughter went through periods of extreme stretching. And remember, this is a girl who couldn't even lift her leg out of bed. And all of a sudden, she's standing on both feet doing ballet kicks, kicking her legs up over her head. She sent us pictures of her doing back bends for a person who couldn't even be touched without her ribs coming out of joint. So during the course of the next 7 days, she went through incredible levels of stretching in every area of her body. And each one of those stretchings was supernaturally induced because there was no way physically that she could do it. After the whole 7-day period passed, she was completely, totally, absolutely healed to the max. And the final day of her healing was 2/22/22, and she was 22. And I said, Lord, what is the significance of this? And he goes, I've just given her permission to open the door called 222. Now, what is the door of 222? I can tell you that it is the door to the heartbeat of God that produces the frequency of love, which is the highest level of frequency that can be attained to in terms of the ultimate configuration of us becoming the fullness of the Godhead bodily, dwelling in mortal flesh. That is what we are becoming because we're being formed in the pattern of Yeshua HaMashiach, who was the fullness of the Godhead bodily, dwelling in mortal flesh. What that means is there is a frequency in heaven called the frequency of love that opens up the hearts of all human beings. And it doesn't make any difference how hard-hearted, how antichrist spirited they are. When their spirit picks up on the fact that our hearts are vibrating at the same frequency of love that the heartbeat of Yahweh is beating at, their spirit suddenly picks up and begins to ignite into a raging fire until it overcomes all of the darkness and all of the previous antichrist spirit that was in their soulish realm. So the door of 222 is a very supremely important part for us to understand. How do we become the door opener to 222, which is the love frequency in the heartbeat of the Father? One of the reasons why I can succeed with the cannibals and the headhunters and going into villages where they've chopped off the heads of 6,000 men in one weekend, how do you overcome the Antichrist spirit that rules there? And the answer is to step into the door called 222 and allow your heart to begin to vibrate with the frequency of the heartbeat of God, which is love. When that happens, it doesn't make any difference what kind of incredible darkness those people have been surrendered to. Their spirit remembers that sound, and their spirit ignites into a light and begins to vibrate on the same frequency. I call this the tuning fork frequency. So if we will begin to allow the light that is in us to speak to the light that is in every man, not because I said so, because Jesus said so. He said, I didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but that through me the world might be saved. For I am the light that lights the whole earth and the light that lights the heart of every man. So, for to every man is given a measure of faith, and that measure of faith is called their spirit. Now, their soul may take control, and their soul may rule and reign over them, but when our hearts begin to function from the place called the door of 222, it overwhelms and dismantles all of the darkness that they can walk in, and they give their hearts eagerly and with great anticipation into our own lives.